Hi guys, today's video is about interior photography, how you can get the same kinds of photographs that you see in travel brochures. Stay tuned for more. I was lucky enough to catch up with lodge photographer extraordinaire David Rogers. He has the enviable job of traveling all over Southern Africa, photographing some of the most beautiful lodges you can imagine. He's even written books about the subject. The trick, he says, is to balance the light of the inside and the outside, the bright light outside and the dull light inside the room. This is how he does it.
Well, there are a couple of ways of doing it, Robyn, and the first would be to get it when the light between the dark and the light balances. And there's very, very short windows during each day when you can do that, and it's normally before sunrise and after dark when you can get the natural light to balance with the light inside the lodge. And then the second way would be to understand that there's a difference and then photograph with your exposure possibly slightly dark on the inside and know that you can retrieve those shadows inside the camera, well, in post-production, outside the camera. So that would be the other way. That would be pulling out the dark detail. And the third one is in very extreme contrast situations where you might decide you have to shoot two different exposures and then combine those afterwards in Photoshop.
Are you bracketing as a matter of course?
No, I tend not to bracket all the time, and there's quite a lot of range in the pictures that I take, but certainly in dodgy situations I will, and I'll tend to bracket 3 stops in each direction, but you'd want to have quite a big range of pictures. The difference between the bright and the dark in a normal daytime situation, when you photograph, you're trying to retrieve some detail in the background, will be very much darker. And I'll tend to use manual exposures rather than just bracketing. I'll go into manual exposure and then I'll spot meter on the outside and I'll meter on the inside to get my readings.
Are you using any supplementary lighting?
I tend not to use supplementary lighting other than the lighting that's provided by the lodge. So that the room will have lights, and I'll use those effectively and I'll try and balance them. In certain situations I might use some off-camera flash or some reflectors, but I tend not to. I might use sun coming inside as a bit of an effect to get a bit of this sun effect, but not artificial light very much.
So now you know my favorite shot, which is shot over the bed in that lodge, I think it's Leopard Hills, right. And you can see the bathroom in the background and the outside. So that's 3 rooms that you've got to balance the light for.
Okay.
How did you do that one?
Well, that shot, there are a couple of different things. Firstly, I was shooting, the exterior was through a pane of glass. So I would have definitely used a polarizing filter for that, because that takes the reflections out of glass. So I use that quite often. The next thing was I'd have to be catering very much for that depth of field issue, because the bed's very close and the distance is very far. So I would have focused manually to find a point, normally 1/3 in. I would have used maybe a fairly small aperture, f11, f18, somewhere around there, for maximum depth of field. And then I would have done my light blending. And of that particular image, I think the 2 interior shots would have come out of one particular photograph, where I would have then maybe used the shadows and highlights in Lightroom to have brought out the detail in the dark areas. I might have dropped the highlights to bring out the light from the outside, so that you would then be bending that curve. But I think in that shot we might have used a little bit of an extra layer for the exterior and then brushed that in gently over the picture. So so it actually looks like it's one as the eye would see it, but the eye is much cleverer than the camera. So that's what we're trying to do, so to create a picture with blended exposures where you feel like that's how it would look naturally, but the camera would not have been able to record that. There's not a lot of technology that needed to take good photographs inside a lodge. The most important thing is obviously to have a tripod, and I tend to use tripod that goes fairly high, because I often wanting to climb on a bed and shoot across things. And I like the Kirk system. Not the Kirk, they call it the Arca plate, and that works. It's a nice solid system. And on this camera, I've got a nice little bracket, an L bracket. I've got the Nikon D850, which is a full frame camera with very good dynamic range, and that's what I like to use. And I use two lenses most of the time, the 24-70, which is a standard, what they call a standard lens. It's an f2.8, which means there's lots of light coming in. The camera itself, I set it on RAW, and then I process my pictures afterwards, and that's a big part of the job, processing afterwards. The 14-24mm lens is a go-to lens for when you need wider shots or when you need to show the full extent of a room. It's got fantastic clarity, and it doesn't distort, doesn't give you a fisheye effect. And I use that a lot, either for single shots and sometimes for stitching and panoramas. If I want to show a bedroom and put the pictures together afterwards, that's pretty useful. I think that the 80-200 or the 70-200mm lens is also very useful, especially if you're going to take pictures of staff or things where you want to get slightly further away, the waiter coming in or someone coming to the bed and brushing down the bed, and it's all. So those are the three lenses that I would use most of the time. I've also got this small little AFS 50mm 1.4, which is got a very wide aperture, and it allows you to photograph a subject and blur out the background completely. So that's also pretty useful. In terms of filters, I keep it really simple. I don't put any glass in front of my expensive glass. I keep the lenses clean and I protect them with lens hoods when I need to, but we don't use UV filters. The only filter that you can't add afterwards is a polarizing filter. Polarizing filters cut out reflections, and they're very useful when you're photographing anything with a shiny, anything that looks a bit shiny. It might be a picture frame, or maybe you're photographing through a window, or there are glasses involved. The polarizer is really handy for that, cutting out the glare.
I hope this video has inspired you to take more photographs of the places you stay in, whether it's a 5-star lodge or a little tent in the bush. If you want to find out even more about interior photography, read the August issue of Getaway and my Photography Masterclass column.